The clock ticks. The world's richest man sits in front of millions, ready to break his silence. But behind his eyes lies a secret that could destroy everything. His wife vanished without a trace. What's the truth? And why has he waited so long to reveal it? The air in the studio was thick with anticipation. Ethan Holt sat in a stark, almost sterile chair, his broad shoulders tense beneath a tailored suit. The soft hum of the lights above buzzed in his ears as he stared straight ahead. The world was watching him. He could feel it, the eyes, the whispers, the judgment. And yet, there was no turning back now. A familiar voice pierced through the heavy silence. The anchor, a sharp, poised woman named Claire, leaned forward with a professional smile that barely concealed the storm brewing underneath. "Mr. Holt," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It's been 3 years since your wife, Grace, disappeared. You've stayed silent all this time. Why now?" The words were simple, but the weight of them was crushing. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wasn't prepared for the flood of memories that rushed in. The late nights in the kitchen with Grace, their soft laughter as they made dinner together. Those moments felt like a lifetime ago. He blinked, trying to clear the fog that clouded his mind, but his gaze flickered down to his hands resting in his lap, knuckles white as he gripped them tightly. He could feel the tremors starting at his fingertips, spreading through his arms. The world expected an answer, but could he give them the truth? Could he finally shatter the walls he had so carefully built around himself? Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, leaning forward, but his voice came out low, hesitant. "I never wanted to speak," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a mixture of pain and determination. "Not because I didn't care, but because the truth was too much. For me, for her, and for everyone who thought they knew us." Claire's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a fleeting second. The world didn't care about his pain. They wanted answers, and they wanted them now. "People think you were involved in her disappearance," Claire pressed. "Is that true?" Ethan flinched as if she had slapped him. The words stung more than he expected. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, he fought the urge to just walk out of the room. To run. But he couldn't. Not anymore. "No," he said firmly, his voice steadying as he continued. "I love Grace. I still do. I would never hurt her." The words tasted bitter, but they were true. His mind flashed back to their last conversation, just days before she disappeared. He had been so caught up in his empire, in making sure everything was perfect, that he hadn't seen the cracks forming in their marriage. He hadn't heard the silent pleas for help in her eyes. "You said you loved her," Claire continued, her tone softening ever so slightly. "But why didn't you protect her when she needed you the most?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He had no answer. He didn't know how to protect her, how to help her escape from the world she'd been a part of, a world he had never known about, never even suspected. He had failed her in every way possible, and now he was paying the price. "I couldn't see it," Ethan whispered, more to himself than to her. "I couldn't see that she was trapped by something I didn't understand." There was a brief, agonizing silence. Claire studied him, her eyes piercing, trying to read the man before her. Ethan could feel her judgment. He could feel the questions swirling beneath the surface. But in that silence, he could also hear the echo of his own guilt. It was deafening. The clock ticked on, but time seemed to stand still in that room. Ethan's pulse quickened as memories of Grace flooded his mind. Her laugh, her soft touch, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about the things she loved. She wasn't just his wife. She was the part of him he never knew he needed. But now she was gone, and no one knew the truth. No one knew what had really happened. With a sharp exhale, Ethan straightened his back and turned his gaze toward Claire, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He had to say it. He had to say it now, or he would never be free of the guilt. "I need to tell you everything," he said, his voice low, almost fragile. "The truth about Grace and about me." The room seemed to grow colder. The studio lights suddenly felt harsh on his skin, and the walls seemed to close in. Ethan knew there was no turning back now. Once the words left his mouth, there would be no going back. But maybe, just maybe, telling the truth was the only way he could finally live with himself. The tension in the studio was thick, suffocating almost. Ethan's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. But the anchor Claire didn't push him further. Instead, she leaned back, waiting patiently for him to continue. She could see the struggle in his eyes. This wasn't just an interview for him, it was a reckoning. Ethan's gaze dropped to the polished table in front of him, his fingers curling and uncurling around the edge as he wrestled with the past. He wasn't sure where to begin. How could he explain the years of his life that felt like a blur of success and failure, love and loss? Where had it all gone wrong? The silence was broken when his voice, rough and strained, finally filled the space. "We were happy once," he began, almost as if speaking to himself. "I remember when Grace and I first met. God. It felt like everything fell into place. She was everything to me. So full of life, full of energy. She made me want to be better." His eyes seemed to drift into the distance, seeing something beyond the sterile set, beyond the lights. She had this way of lighting up a room, you know? Even when she didn't speak, people felt her presence. She had this warmth. His voice faltered as a brief flash of regret flickered across his face. And I took it for granted. I thought I could have both, the empire I was building and the woman I loved. But I couldn't. And I didn't see it until it was too late. Claire's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by that? What changed?" Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers, dark and distant. "I changed. I thought the money, the success, would make everything easier. I was obsessed with it. But Grace? She wasn't happy. Not really." He took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions, but the weight of the memory seemed to crush him. "I was always so focused on what I didn't have, on what I was building, that I didn't notice her slipping away. She needed me to see her, to really see her, but I didn't." His voice cracked, the vulnerability unmistakable. "She kept telling me something was wrong, that she didn't feel safe, that something was missing, but I brushed it off. I thought she was just being dramatic. I was wrong." Claire, sensing the rawness of his confession, softened her approach. "You didn't know." "I didn't know," he repeated, his eyes searching her face for any sign of understanding. "I couldn't see the signs. I should have been there for her. But instead, I let her retreat into herself, into a life I didn't even know existed." There was a pause as the gravity of his words settled between them. The studio felt colder, the silence stretching longer than it should have. Ethan could feel the walls closing in on him, the weight of his own shame pressing harder with every passing second. Finally, he continued, almost as if the words were spilling out against his will. "The truth is, I was so caught up in my own world that I never saw the darkness she was hiding, the danger she was in. And that's why I couldn't stop what happened." Claire's voice broke the silence again, a hint of disbelief and concern creeping in. "What do you mean, Ethan? What danger?" Ethan's gaze hardened, the emotion in his eyes shifting from pain to something darker. I can't explain it all yet. But Grace was involved in things, in a world I knew nothing about. She was running from something, someone, and I didn't even know." There was a flicker of recognition in Claire's eyes, a realization that Ethan wasn't just dealing with a marriage falling apart, but something far more sinister. She leaned in, her voice gentle but insistent. "So, you're saying this isn't just about your marriage falling apart? This goes deeper." Ethan nodded slowly. His shoulders sagged as he let the words linger in the air. "Much deeper. And it's the reason why I couldn't keep her safe. The reason I couldn't stop it." As the tension built in the room, Ethan finally lifted his head, meeting Claire's gaze directly. "I didn't know the truth until it was too late. And now all I have left is the guilt." The studio lights, once so bright and cold, now seemed to flicker, casting shadows on his face. Ethan's confession had only begun, but the weight of his words had already started to sink in. He wasn't just revealing the truth about his wife. He was revealing the truth about himself, the man who failed her, the man who couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Ethan's words had hung in the air like a heavy fog, and though the studio was silent, a storm was raging inside him. He could see the questions in Claire's eyes, but there was no simple answer. He needed to go deeper, to peel back the layers he had buried for years. He owed it to Grace, to himself, to finally speak the whole truth. "I don't know where to begin," his voice was barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his hair, agitated. The truth was messy, fragmented, and every time he tried to piece it together, it felt like there was something missing. Grace was not who I thought she was. I didn't know the woman I married as well as I thought. Claire, sensing the depth of his pain, nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue. What do you mean by that? Ethan's eyes seemed to lose focus as he looked at her, but in truth, he was far away, lost in memories. The first time they met, the excitement of their courtship, the laughter that filled their home, it all seemed so distant now. He exhaled slowly and shook his head. She wasn't just my wife, Ethan began, his voice thick with emotion. She was a survivor, but she wasn't always like that. When we met, she was free, full of life, full of love. I thought I was giving her everything. But what I didn't realize was that she had already been carrying a burden long before I came into her life. The words tasted bitter as they left his mouth. He could almost hear the echo of their last argument, the one that had haunted him for months. It had been so small, so trivial. She had been distant, cold, and he hadn't understood. He brushed it off, convinced everything would be fine. But it wasn't. She had a past, Claire. A past that didn't involve me, Ethan admitted, his voice wavering slightly as the weight of his confession began to settle on him. And it was a dangerous one. The kind of world I couldn't even imagine. Claire leaned in, her eyes narrowing with concern. What kind of world? Who was she running from? Ethan clenched his jaw, the pain in his chest intensifying as he tried to gather the courage to reveal what had been buried for so long. I don't know all the details, he said, his words slow and measured. But I know enough to know that her past wasn't something she could escape. And she didn't want me to know about it. She didn't want anyone to know. He paused, his mind flashing to the many times Grace had pulled away from him. There were nights when she would come home late, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. He would ask what was wrong, but she would just shake her head and say nothing. I'm fine, Ethan. I'm just tired, she'd say, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. But Ethan had been too wrapped up in his own world to notice the signs. The late-night calls, the secretive meetings, the way she would lock herself in the bathroom for hours. He had dismissed it all. Too busy, too distracted. His heart ached as he remembered those nights. She tried to protect me from it, Claire. She tried to protect me from the truth. But I never asked the right questions. Claire sat back, her face softening with sympathy. And then one day, she just disappeared. Ethan nodded slowly, his throat tightening as he relived the moment everything changed. He could see it in his mind, as clearly as if it were happening right in front of him. The night Grace had come to him, her face pale, her hands shaking. She'd said she was scared of something he didn't understand, scared of someone who had found her. He had promised her that they would go away, that they would leave everything behind. But he hadn't known what she was truly up against. And that night, when she was gone, he had found her empty apartment, her clothes, her phone all gone. She didn't just leave, Claire, he said, his voice trembling. She was taken. I think she was trying to run, but I couldn't help her. I didn't even know how. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, and Ethan could feel the weight of them pressing on his chest. He had failed her. He had failed to protect her when she needed him most. I didn't even know who to turn to. The police? They thought I was crazy. The media? They thought I was hiding something. His eyes were glassy now, the tears threatening to spill. But I wasn't hiding anything. I was just lost. In over my head. Claire watched him for a moment, her face etched with empathy. It was clear that Ethan was carrying a burden that few could understand. His success, his wealth, it meant nothing in the face of the love he had lost. The life he had failed to protect. As the silence stretched between them, Claire's voice broke it gently. But you never stopped looking for her, did you? Ethan shook his head, a small, bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I never stopped. I kept thinking that if I just looked hard enough, I would find her. I kept telling myself that if I kept searching, if I kept believing, I'd bring her home. But I couldn't. A long, painful pause followed as Ethan closed his eyes. The pain, the regret, it was all so much to bear. But the truth had to come out. It was the only way to finally honor Grace's memory, even if it was too late. The media had turned on him. What was once admiration for his success now felt like an insatiable hunger, devouring him with each new headline. Ethan couldn't escape the constant buzz of his phone, the flashing of news alerts, or the glares from the paparazzi who seemed to haunt his every move. But none of that mattered. None of it had ever mattered. All that mattered was finding Grace. Sitting alone in his office, surrounded by stacks of files, police reports, and photographs of Grace. Her smiling face, her warm eyes. Ethan felt a sickening sense of helplessness. No matter how much he searched, no matter how many phone calls he made, the pieces of the puzzle never seemed to fit together. The police had long since given up, but he couldn't. He wouldn't. He had hired private investigators, digging into every lead, every connection from Grace's past that she'd kept hidden. But each dead and only deepened the pit in his stomach. There was no trace of her. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. He slammed a file down onto the desk, frustration bubbling over. "Where are you, Grace?" he muttered to himself, his voice raw with emotion. His hands were shaking now, fingers pressed against his temples as the weight of the truth became harder to carry. He wasn't just losing her. He was losing himself. Just then, the phone rang. The sound was sharp, cutting through the silence of his office. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he grabbed it, breath catching in his throat. It was the investigator he'd hired, the one he'd been waiting to hear from for weeks. "Mr. Holt, we've found something," the voice on the other end said, low and tentative. "But it's not good." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What is it? What did you find?" The investigator hesitated. "We tracked down some of the people from her past. There are connections, dangerous ones. And we've come across a name, a man who might know more about her disappearance." Ethan's stomach dropped. Dangerous. It was a word he never thought he'd associate with Grace. She was the woman he loved, the woman who had always been so light, so warm. But now, the deeper he dug, the more he realized how little he knew about her life before him. Who is he? Ethan's voice was barely more than a growl. The investigator paused again. "His name is Victor Graves. He's not someone you want to get involved with. He's been connected to a lot of shady operations. I'll send over everything we've got." Ethan's mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments. Victor Graves. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. He had heard rumors, whispers about this man, but he had never taken them seriously. Now he realized how foolish he had been. Grace had always been careful not to tell him everything. He had always thought it was because of the past she wanted to forget, but now he saw it in a new light. Maybe she had been running from something. Someone. Ethan stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back behind him. "Send me the information. Now." The investigator's voice was steady. "I'll have it to you in an hour. But be careful, Mr. Holt. Victor Graves is dangerous. He doesn't leave people alive when they get too close." The line went dead, and for a moment, Ethan stood there, frozen in his office. His hands gripped the desk tightly as his mind whirled. He had always thought he was in control, his empire, his business, his life, but the reality was that he had never been in control of anything. Grace's disappearance had pulled back the curtain on a world he hadn't even known existed. A world filled with darkness and danger, where secrets were buried and lives were lost. But no matter what, Ethan couldn't stop. He couldn't let go of the hope that, somehow, Grace was still out there. As he paced back and forth, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He turned to see his assistant standing in the doorway, holding an envelope in her hands. "Mr. Holt, this just came for you," she said, her voice barely audible. Ethan took the envelope from her, tearing it open without hesitation. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a picture of Grace, looking more beautiful than he remembered, but her eyes were filled with fear. The picture was recent, and scrawled across the back in hastily written ink were 3 words that sent a jolt of panic through his chest. "She's still alive." His breath caught in his throat as the world seemed to tilt beneath him. For the first time in 3 years, Ethan allowed himself to believe it. Grace was out there. She was alive, and he was going to find her no matter what it took. But the thought of who was out there with her, the shadow of Victor Graves lurking in the background, was enough to chill him to the bone. Ethan knew he was no longer just searching for Grace. He was searching for a truth far darker than he could have ever imagined. The photograph was still clutched in Ethan's hand as he sat at his desk, the words on the back searing into his mind. She's still alive. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of relief and terror twisting inside him. Grace was out there. She hadn't disappeared forever. She hadn't left him. But if she was alive, why hadn't she contacted him? Why hadn't she come home? He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as his mind raced. There were so many unanswered questions, so many possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. But one thing was certain, he was going to find her. The door opened again, and his assistant entered, hesitating when she saw the frantic energy radiating from him. "Mr. Holt," she asked gently, her voice full of concern. "What's going on?" Ethan turned toward her, his face grim. He didn't have the luxury of time to explain everything. "Give me everything you can on Victor Graves," he said, his voice low but commanding. "I need to know who he is, where he's been, and who he's connected to. I'm not taking any chances." His assistant nodded and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You're really going after him, aren't you?" Ethan's eyes hardened, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "I don't have a choice. I've waited too long to know the truth. I can't wait any longer." The assistant left, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. As the minutes ticked by, he stared at the photograph of Grace, running his thumb over the edges of the picture. Her smile had always been a beacon in his life, but now it was tainted with fear. The woman he had loved for so long was somewhere, caught in a world he knew nothing about. The ache in his chest grew stronger as he thought of all the times he had taken her for granted, the times he had brushed off her concerns, believing that everything would just work itself out. Now she was out there alone, and he had no idea what kind of horror she had endured. Ethan walked to the window, staring out at the city below. His empire was vast, his wealth immeasurable, but none of it meant anything if Grace wasn't safe. His entire world had been built around the idea of control, of having everything at his fingertips. But now it was clear he had never truly been in control. Not of his life, not of his marriage, and certainly not of Grace's fate. His phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was the investigator. "Mr. Holt, we've found something," the voice said, urgency in every syllable. "We've traced Graves to a location just outside the city. He's staying under a false name. But there's more. We've also uncovered a connection between him and a group of people involved in some very dangerous activities." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Tell me where he is." The investigator hesitated. "It's not that simple. Graves is well protected. He has connections everywhere. If you go after him directly, you're putting yourself in danger." Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't care about danger anymore. He only cared about finding Grace. "I'm going," Ethan said, his voice hard. "Give me the location. I'll handle the rest." There was a brief silence on the other end. "I understand, but please be careful. Graves is not someone you want to cross without thinking through the consequences." Ethan hung up the phone, his resolve solidifying. He would find Grace. Nothing and no one would stop him. The photo had given him a shred of hope he thought he had lost forever, and he wasn't going to let that go. He gathered the papers from his desk, his mind already focused on the next step, the next move. There was no more waiting, no more questions, just action. The door to his office opened again, and his assistant returned, a folder in hand. She placed it on his desk and looked at him, her eyes full of concern. "This is everything we could find. It's risky, Ethan. He's dangerous." Ethan nodded, not looking up. "I know." He opened the folder, scanning the information inside. It confirmed what the investigator had said. Victor Graves was a dangerous man. But it also revealed something else, something far more troubling. Victor had connections with people who were known for taking people, disappearing them without a trace. Ethan's stomach churned as the realization hit him. Grace had been involved with people far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But now, there was no turning back. He had promised himself he would find Grace, and he wasn't about to break that promise. He looked up at his assistant, his eyes hard. "I'm leaving now. If anything comes up, let me know." Without another word, he walked out of the office, his mind focused entirely on one thing, Grace. He would find her. He had to. The clock was ticking, and with every passing minute, he felt the walls closing in. But this time, he wasn't just running away from the truth. He was running toward it. Ethan's car roared through the empty streets, the city lights flashing past in a blur as he drove faster than he should. His thoughts raced just as quickly. He had finally gotten the address from the investigator, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was far from the world he knew, far from the life of wealth and power he had built, but it was exactly where he needed to be. With every mile, the weight of the past few years pressed harder on his chest. He had never imagined that Grace, his wife, the woman he loved, had been involved with people like Victor Graves. He had never even known there were such shadows lurking behind the woman he had married. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel, and his jaw clenched. How could I not see this? A gnawing guilt tore at him. He thought he had protected Grace, that by giving her everything he had, he was showing her how much he loved her. But now he realized how little he had truly understood her, how little he had seen beyond his own world. I failed you, Grace. I failed you. The car finally screeched to a halt in front of the warehouse. The area was dimly lit, the buildings worn and cracked. There were no people in sight, no life, just shadows and silence. Ethan stepped out of the car, his heart pounding, each step heavy with the weight of what he was about to uncover. He knew the risks. He knew this wasn't just about finding Grace. It was about uncovering a truth that could shatter everything he thought he knew. As he approached the entrance of the warehouse, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his pulse racing as he saw the name on the screen. It was from the investigator. He answered quickly, his voice hoarse. "What's going on? Did you find anything?" There was a long pause before the investigator spoke, his tone strained. "Ethan, you need to listen to me. I've uncovered something about Grace's past. She wasn't just running from Victor Graves. She was involved in something much bigger. You need to get out of there. Now." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What did you find?" The investigator's voice lowered, almost a whisper. Grace was part of a dangerous underground operation. She was in deep with them. This is more than just a missing person case. She was caught in a world that doesn't forgive. And Victor Graves is just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know how deep this goes, but you can't trust anyone involved with him. Not even Grace. Ethan's world seemed to tilt, the ground beneath him shaking as the words hit him like a punch. He had always known Grace was hiding something, but this was something he wasn't prepared for. She hadn't just been running from some past trauma. She had been living in a world so dark and dangerous that even he couldn't comprehend it. "I have to find her," Ethan said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and resolve. "She's out there. I can't leave her in that world." The investigator's voice was filled with caution. "You don't know what you're walking into. If you go in there, you could make things worse. You could get hurt or worse." But Ethan didn't listen. His decision had been made. He couldn't stop now. Not after everything he had learned. Not after seeing that photo of Grace. So alive, so full of fear. With the phone still in his hand, Ethan pushed open the warehouse door. The air inside was thick, heavy with the smell of oil and dust. He could hear his breath, sharp and fast in the silence. The space was vast and cavernous, the dark shadows hiding more than he could see. But there was something else, a hum in the air, a sense that something dangerous was lurking just out of sight. He moved quietly, the floor creaking beneath his shoes, each step deliberate. As he made his way deeper into the warehouse, his eyes scanned the shadows, searching for anything that might lead him to Grace. And then he saw it. At the far end of the warehouse, in the dim light, he caught sight of a figure. A man, Victor Graves. Ethan's pulse quickened. There he was, the man who had been the source of all this, the man who had taken Grace. But he wasn't alone. A second figure emerged from the darkness, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was Grace. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes torn, and her face was gaunt. But it was her, the woman he had loved, the woman who had once been the light in his life, and she was in the grip of a nightmare. Victor turned slowly, his cold eyes locking onto Ethan's with a sense of casual menace. "So, the millionaire finally shows up. I didn't think you had the guts." Grace's eyes darted nervously between them, but she didn't move. It was as if she were frozen in place, caught between the man who had held her captive and the man who had failed to save her. Ethan took a step forward, his voice low and steady. "Let her go, Graves. This is between you and me. Let her go, and I'll make sure you walk away from this alive." Victor laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. "You don't get to make demands here, Holt. This is my world now." The tension between them was unbearable, and Ethan's instincts screamed at him to act, to do something, anything, to get Grace out of there. But he knew this wasn't just about physical strength. It was about trust, about understanding the world she had been trapped in, about understanding the consequences of everything he had overlooked. And suddenly, the truth hit him with the force of a tidal wave. Grace had been protecting him this whole time. She hadn't just been running from Graves. She had been trying to shield him from a world he couldn't understand. A world that had now pulled them both into its darkness. The truth was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The silence in the warehouse was deafening, broken only by the soft, almost inaudible shuffling of feet. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he stood locked in a silent standoff with Victor Graves. His eyes flickered to Grace, her fragile frame casting a shadow of sadness, and he felt an overwhelming sense of both relief and despair. She was here. She was alive. But what had she been through? Victor chuckled darkly, sensing Ethan's tension. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't your world anymore, Holt. You think you can just waltz in and save the day? This is my domain, and you're just a pawn in a game you'll never understand." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. The anger burned within him. But there was something else, too, a rising understanding. This wasn't about saving Grace. It was about her freedom, about the truth that had been hidden for too long. He looked at her again, her eyes clouded with fear and shame, and his heart broke all over again. "Let her go, Victor," Ethan said, his voice low but filled with determination. "This ends tonight." For a moment, Victor said nothing. He just stood there, watching Ethan with a predatory calm. Grace shifted slightly, her eyes flickering to Ethan, a small, almost imperceptible movement. It was the first time she had made eye contact with him since he'd walked in. Ethan felt the weight of that gaze, a mixture of relief, sadness, and a desperation that made his chest tighten. "I never wanted this for you, Grace," he whispered, his voice cracking as he spoke her name. "I didn't understand what you were running from. I failed you, but I swear I won't fail you again." Grace's lips trembled, and for a fleeting second, a tear slipped down her cheek. "You couldn't have known," she whispered back, her voice raw with emotion. "I never wanted you to know about all of this." Ethan's mind reeled. He could see it now, the pieces falling into place. Grace had shielded him from this world for so long, trying to keep him safe, trying to protect him from the darkness she had been thrust into before he even came into her life. She hadn't left him. She hadn't abandoned him. She had been keeping a promise to herself, to shield him from the monsters that lurked in her past. But now here they were, together in a place neither of them wanted to be, facing the very monsters she had tried so hard to keep him from. Victor's sneer cut through the moment like a blade. "She's mine now, Holt. You can't take her from me. Not after everything she's done." Ethan felt the rage bubbling up, but he pushed it down. The fight was no longer about Victor. It was about Grace, the woman he had loved, the woman he had failed, the woman who had been trapped in a nightmare beyond his understanding. With a sudden, sharp movement, Victor reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a gun. It gleamed in the dim light, the cold metal reflecting the little light that filtered into the warehouse. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. Grace's breath hitched, her face pale, her body stiff. She glanced at Ethan, her eyes pleading. "You need to go, Ethan. Please. It's too late for me." "No," Ethan said, his voice firm. "It's not too late. I'm not leaving you. Not again." Victor laughed, shaking his head. "You think you can save her? You think you can just waltz in and fix everything? You're too late." Before Ethan could react, Grace's voice rang out, sharp and desperate. "Stop. She stepped forward, her movements hesitant at first, but with growing determination. Her eyes locked onto Victor, and for the first time, she stood taller. "I'm not your property, Victor. I never was. I've been running from you, not for myself, but to protect someone else, the man I loved." She turned to Ethan, her voice softer now but still fierce. "I should have told you the truth. I should have trusted you." Ethan stepped toward her, his hand outstretched, but Victor snarled, pointing the gun at him. "You want to save her? You'll have to go through me first." But just as quickly as it had started, the tension broke. Grace lunged forward, knocking the gun from Victor's hand. She didn't hesitate. She was no longer the woman trapped in fear. She was a woman who had taken control of her life, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Victor Graves, hold her back any longer. Ethan caught the gun as it fell to the floor, tossing it aside as Victor staggered back, stunned by Grace's defiance. "Go," Grace said urgently, her voice trembling. "Get out of here, both of you. You can't fight this. He'll come for you." Victor, livid with rage, moved toward her, but Ethan stepped between them, his body tense, ready to defend her with everything he had. "This ends now, Victor," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of everything he had learned. He had already failed Grace once. He wasn't going to fail her again. "I'll make sure you don't hurt her again." Grace stood at his side, and for the first time in a long time, there was strength in her eyes. Victor sneered, but for the first time, there was hesitation in his movements. The power he once held was slipping away. Slowly, reluctantly, he backed off. "This isn't over, Holt. I'll make sure of it." Without another word, he turned and fled into the darkness of the warehouse, leaving Ethan and Grace alone for the first time in years. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence of relief. Grace's trembling hand found Ethan's, and without a word, they stood there together. Ethan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as if he could somehow keep the world at bay. He knew there would be more to face, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was losing her. He had found her, and this time, he wasn't letting her go.